Hey guys, I'm recording this on July 2nd, 2026. And as you know, because I keep talking about it endlessly, working on this book. And what I'm discovering is that the hepatitis B vaccine for newborns turns out to be the root of all evil. I mean, all roads of evil, of biomedical evil, uh, seem to converge on this one thing. And uh, for example, one of the guys that pushed through, um, right, let me take this back. So you often hear, oh, the Rockefellers ruined medicine. But unfortunately, people are very vague about that. It sounds like an unbelievable claim that's not backed up. And as part of my research, and it probably won't appear in this book, it'll appear in another book. It's absolutely literally true. Um, Rockefeller and his son and his minions took all of that industrial mentality, which you need. Like if you're going to run an oil refinery, it better be run in a very controlled way, right? I mean, there's no way around that. Medicine is a completely different thing. Um, and it is not good to run medicine like an oil refinery. But that's basically how our medical system works now. And that is directly the result of Rockefeller and his minions specifically setting out to take over medicine, to control it, to systematize it, not in a good way, but just to systematize it for the sake of systematizing it, to eliminate all competition and to create a kind of endless financial feedback loop for themselves and their friends. Um, One of the things I talk about in this book that's going to come out later after this book I'm currently working on is they specifically went out to destroy all alternative schools of thought, medical schools of thought. And they destroyed the schools as well because our country used to have a lot of different kinds of medicine. We had a very, very, very strong, robust, successful herbal medicine. And we're not talking about, mint tea or something, which isn't a bad thing. But we're talking about really sophisticated. It was a fusion of Native American with African, with lots of Irish, Scottish, English uh, herbal traditions all fused together. And it was taught in a very systematic way. It was called eclectic medicine. There was a big headquarters for it in Cincinnati. I believe they still have their papers are there, and there were schools all over the country. And it was a superior form of medicine to what was being done then. Anyway, the um, uh, Rockefeller set out very deliberately, very specifically to destroy that. So it is true. It is true that the Rockefellers basically poisoned the practice of medicine, not only in the United States, but in the world, because everybody unfortunately follows us. Um, and again, the key factor about this particular branch of medicine, or this form of medicine, what I call Rockefeller medicine, is no competition is allowed, no discussion is allowed, and dissidents are hunted down. That's part of the deal. Remember COVID? Okay, that was a simple um, manifestation, a working out of the basic way that medicine works in our current era. There's that. I mean, it was extreme, but you got to see it in all its glory. There's only one answer, and we're going to ram it down your throats, even if it kills you. And if you say anything about it, we're going to hunt you down. Right? I wrote a whole book about that, what the nurses saw. Right. So anyway, I want to talk about the history because see, if you just leave the narrative there, oh, the Rockefellers ruined medicine, it's useful, it's interesting, but it leaves out some really important stuff. Now, I've never seen what I'm about to talk about anywhere else. Why that should be, I don't know. I don't get it. There are people that their whole life, decades of career, collecting hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. You would think that they would know the basics. Um, well, I don't know. I don't get it. But I'm always mystified by these things. But anyway, here's the history of medicine from John D. Rockefeller to Bill Gates, because we all know about Bill Gates and we all know about the World Health Organization. Okay. What we don't know is the critical role that the hepatitis B vaccine, that monstrosity, played in helping pass the torch from Rockefeller onwards. All right, so let's take a look. I'm gonna be reading this because I don't want to leave anything out. The way I do this is I spend hours and hours and hours and hours using Google, which is now crap, um, but AI, it's a good research tool. And here's the deal: if you ask it questions, it'll give you the party line. All right. So you've got to be able to probe. You've got to be able to find where they're wrong, and you've got to be able to hammer them. And if you do, they'll actually come up with the goods. Now, how long we'll have this tool for available to us? I don't know. I'm kind of amazed that they're making it available. I think they don't realize how powerful it is. I mean, forget all the hype about, it's going to change the world and all that stuff. But from the point of view of research, I mean, I would need, I don't know, maybe 10 full-time people camped out in a major, research library at my beck and call in order to duplicate the speed of research that I'm able to do with AI. Now, you also have to be able to call AI on its bullshit because there's a lot of it. But, I wrote a book about that too. I forget the AI, artificial intelligence question and answer book. And I laid this whole methodology out 3 years ago. But now I'm really using it, really using it at a high, intense level. Um, but my fear is they're going to take this away from us, or they're going to dumb it down. For example, and I'll post this later. A very intelligent professor of medicine at the University of San Francisco, and Vinay is his first name. He was briefly working in Washington under Kennedy, and he didn't last long, unfortunately, but a very smart guy, a good epidemiologist, a good expert and there are very few of them, a good expert in the design and review of medical research, and a critic of it all. He's a very sharp critic. He's come out and said, AI will give you better medical advice than 90% of all doctors. And I have a long-standing thing, and I can't. I don't even want to embarrass myself by telling you how many idiot doctors I've been to and how many thousands of dollars I've wasted over the many years. But I can tell you without a doubt, AI runs circles around any scam artist doctor I've ever given money to in terms of giving me useful understanding of what's going on. Now, of course, my thing is not drug related. So if you have a condition that relates to drugs, AI is going to ram whatever the consensus is down your throat. You got to fight. You got to fight it back. In my case, they were just helpful right away. But you got to be smart. Here's the way it is. If somebody's not educated and not informed, can't ask questions, can't think critically, AI is a disaster, all right? Because it'll just feed you junk. If you can think critically, and you press it, you don't accept its bullshit, AI comes up with some really good stuff. So what it did, as I was writing these different things, I started to notice, okay, we started with Rockefeller, now we ended up with Gates. Something must have happened in between. And you're going to see. So the bottom line, for those of you that want to get to the bottom line fast, I don't blame you. Medical thought, medical research, medical practice, medical thinking, whatever, is under the control of a handful of private individuals. And that started with the Rockefellers over 100 years ago. And it's continued unbroken. But the Rockefellers obviously aren't as involved as they were. So we're going to talk about how this whole thing evolved and how they passed the torch very methodically from one group to another group to another group to another group. And you're going to recognize the names of some of these groups, and you're going to realize for the first time, as I did, that it's all part of a continuity. They're not separate islands, each doing their own thing. It is a stream. Okay, so for those of you interested in that kind of thing, here we go. All right, so it all started with the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901. And that's when Rockefeller decided, hey, I want uh, I want medicine to be practiced the same way I drill and refine and distribute oil. I want it to be a monopoly. I want it to be a single system, and I'd like to control it. That's what he did with oil, and that's what he did with medicine. Um, then, in 1913, um, the Rockefeller Foundation was created, and that became a philanthropy because he needed a way to shelter his money. And they started to treat medical medicine and medical research as a philanthropy, controlled by whoever has the most money. Then they formed, this is very important, the Rockefeller International Health Division, which ran from 1913 to 1951. Why? Because I mean, they didn't just have oil, they had everything. A lot of mines, um, and they needed to keep their managers. So when they sent their managers, for example, to Venezuela or Colombia, where they had a lot of oil, still do, they needed to keep these guys healthy and they needed to keep their workers healthy. So they invested a lot of money in trying to figure out how to do that. Now, their answer turned out to be some of it was sensible, like, well, don't let standing water breed mosquitoes, okay? But the one that they really got behind was the vaccination craze. And they did it in a very reckless, slipshod manner. No science whatsoever, no proper experiment, trials, no proper experiments, no proper record keeping. They just declared that it worked. And then they discovered, ooh, this is a big moneymaker. And it gives us control, right? Everybody's got to come to us for a vaccine. And then, hey, we can coerce them into getting the vaccine. You see how that works? Yeah. Now, they wanted to get out of that business. And in fact, they got out of that business in 1951. That's the international approach to health. So what happened? In 1948, after a couple of years after the UN was founded, the World Health Organization was founded. And what was it modeled after? Right? We're all talking about the WHO and how tyrannical it is and the horrible things they've done. We can just look to COVID, but you can go back and find all kinds of horrible things the World Health Organization has done. But what did they model? First of all, you have to know that the Rockefellers strongly encouraged the UN to be founded not in Geneva or some other far-flung place, but right in the United States, right in New York. They bought the land for it and they donated the land and they threw in a whole bunch of money. And therefore they kept the UN in New York, which was and is their headquarters, so that they could keep an eye on it. And when the World Health Organization was created, it was modeled specifically after the Rockefeller International Health Division with all its criminal activity. And it was actually staffed by, and this is how they have power. Who staffed the World Health Organization when it first started? Employees of the Rockefeller International Health Division. So that was the first passing of the torch. So the Rockefellers went in, they did a scorched earth policy, they destroyed and eliminated every other medical school of thought, and in the process they just destroyed every other, and they destroyed many, many medical schools. They elevated Johns Hopkins as the model. If you knew the details of Johns Hopkins, it would curl your hair. The evil that they have perpetrated over the years, the harm they've done to medicine. I know the world tells you the opposite. Oh, Johns Hopkins, the greatest place on earth. Not exactly. That's going to be in a later book, not the current book I'm working on. But it's very clear the damage that Johns Hopkins did to medicine. But anyway, they were elevated as the ultimate in medicine. And if you didn't comply with the Johns Hopkins model, you would A, get no money from the Rockefellers. And B, the other thing the Rockefellers did that people don't know about is medicine used to be regulated by doctors. So you'd have a local medical board of local physicians, people that were responsible to the community. And if you wanted to be a doctor, you'd get 2 years of school training, which is all you really need for basic medicine. And then and simultaneously, you'd be an apprentice. And you'd be an apprentice to a practicing physician for as long as it took for you to be capable. And when you were ready and your your mentor endorsed you, you would then be examined by the local board of local physicians. It was a very good system. What the Rockefellers did was they took the power away from physicians and gave it to the state, literally. So now the states regulate. That's not a thing that's been going on forever. That's relatively new in the last 100 plus years. And so now the state tells what medical school can operate, what medical school can operate, what doctor can operate. By operate, I mean, be in business. Um, what treatments can be used, what treatments can't be used. Oh, and what vaccinations your children have to have if they go to school. Now think about this. States are, there's 50, well, there weren't 50 then, but there are 50 now. Each state runs its own medical system. It licenses the medical schools. It licenses the doctors and nurses. It enforces the coercive vaccine policies. That has to be done on a state-by-state basis. So one of the things the Rockefellers did, and this you will not see anywhere unless you're reading really deep scholarly work, is they created a lobbying campaign that had to go after every single state by state by state, because first of all, the doctors didn't want to be regulated by the state. Many legislators thought, well, why would we regulate doctors? We don't know anything about medicine. Well, bit by bit, they persuaded with a lot of money, state by state, now all 50 of them, to have the state legislators take control of the practice of medicine. So now you have idiots, attorneys, whoever else shows up at the state legislator, now making medical decisions for the public based on abysmal ignorance and ramming these policies down the throats of practicing physicians under penalty of taking your license away. You see how that works? That was created by the Rockefellers way back when. So when you hear that we have a Rockefeller medical system, they not only destroyed all the, I'm not even going to call it alternative medicine. They destroyed all other medical schools of thought, some of which are superior to the one that we're practicing today. And they took the power from the communities and the attorney and the physicians and gave it to idiot state legislators, which made it very easy to control, because now you have, and then of course the federal government is on top of that. The federal government tells the states, you're not going to get any money if you don't comply. The states pass it on down. This is a Rockefeller creation. So anyway, they created their International Health Division, by the way, where they were testing all kinds of horrific things on people in the developing world. They basically offshored, just like we're doing now, right, with all those bioweapons labs in Ukraine. The Rockefellers started that. They were testing poor people in developing nations using under their International Health Division. Anyway, that International Health Division closed down in 51. Why? It wasn't needed anymore because the World Health Organization, which was embedded in an organization that the Rockefellers helped create and largely controlled, took over that function. And it took it over with a lot of Rockefeller people running it initially. All right, so that was the sort of the first passing of the torch, the Rockefeller torch. So they're kind of, today, they're not really that involved in medicine, or not. I mean, they've got, maybe that's not right. They still have their fingers in it, but not in the control, in the overall controlling way they used to have. They pass that on. In other words, let somebody else take the heat, but do our bidding. You see how that works? That's the World Health Organization. So when the World Health Organization is acting completely insane, and it is an insane institution, the members, so it's all these different countries, each have a seat or two, and it's the governments that appoint their representative to the World Health Organization. That person may or may not be a doctor, or it may be an MD that never practiced medicine. The guy that's running, and then they vote, excuse me, then they vote for the head of the World Health Organization. So the guy there now, he was part of an armed insurrection against his government. And of course, they won, so now they're the government. But he's not an MD, never practiced medicine a day in his life. But he's the head of the World Health Organization. And once you make somebody the head of the World Health Organization, they can decree things. They can decree, COVID's a pandemic, and unleash the hounds of hell on the world. It's an insane system. Excuse me, but that's the World Health Organization. All right. Then the Rockefellers changed their focus. They suddenly became concerned, or not so suddenly, they'd been concerned for a long time, that the wrong kind of people were reproducing. And that's called eugenics. And they wanted to control other people's reproductive choices, which included, I'm sorry, forced sterilization, incarcerating people for life to keep them from reproducing. Um, California led the way. There were more forced sterilizations in California than any other place in the United States. And the founder of Stanford University was a big believer in it. And the first president was a big believer in it. And it was a craze. And by the way, the idea of gas chambers was originally created by somebody in California. I got a drink. Oh, God. Was created by somebody in California who thought of it as a good way to get rid of inferior people. That was the first gas chamber. And then our Nazi colleagues picked up the idea. And you have to understand, much Nazi medical science was the foundation for it was the result of grants given to Germany in the 20s by the Rockefellers, and they kept giving money long after it was obvious what the Nazis were up to. They finally had to pull the plug because it got ridiculous. But for a long time, even after it was in the newspapers, what they were doing, the Rockefellers were still giving money to the medical system of Germany. So anyway, the Rockefellers developed a big interest in they called it population control. And in 1952, Rockefeller III founded something called the Population Council. Okay, and what this did was signal to all the people that are bootlicking toadies, hey, this is the new direction. This is where the money is. This is where the career is. This is where the power is. So the Rockefellers have shown the way, and we're going to jump on board. So um, they helped create the Ford Foundation's obsession with population control. And they let the Ford Foundation do the really dirty work of what? Forced sterilization in developing countries. Um, and we're talking about surrounding a village with, paramilitary and pulling all the men out and busing them to a facility where they were forcibly sterilized. They did the same thing to women. Ford Foundation was involved in that. Um, then there's a sort of another sidebar, which McNamara, the guy that brought us the Vietnam War, well, while they were forcibly sterilizing people and also distributing these horrifically dangerous birth control methods, things that, IUDs, interuterine devices, I mean, caused infection. I mean, just women lost their fertility. I mean, died. I mean, horrible. And they used the developing world as the test bed for all that. And you have to understand that as bad as our medical system is, can you imagine what it's like in an undeveloped country where everybody's rural and they insert these things in people and they don't follow up properly? I mean, it was a disaster, and it was a great way to reduce the population. And I'm sure it wasn't an accident. But they also realized, hey, you know what? One of the reasons people are having so many children is because their children die. So let's come up with a way, to keep the children alive. I mean, it was odd. On the one hand, they wanted to reduce the population. On the other hand, they wanted children to survive, but only because they thought it would reduce the number of children born total. And that's when they got obsessed with vaccines. And there was an actual transition from super aggressive population control, and I mean super aggressive on a Nazi level, to Hey, we'll still distribute all this stuff, but we're also going to ram vaccines down the throats of all these countries because we're so sure vaccines work and work well and are completely safe and are effective. Um, that was something that McNamara got involved in. And then that happened a little bit later. But anyway, the Ford Foundation started its massive population control program that branched out everywhere. Oh, and one of the things McNamara did, he was because when he was head of the World Bank, is he said to these countries, look, if you don't get control over your population growth, we're not going to lend you any money. Now, as an individual, I don't like to borrow money, and I don't. But if you're trying to build infrastructure like dams and electricity and canals and roads, you kind of need to finance it. Not many people are sitting around with that level of money. So if your country won't get financing to make infrastructure improvements, you're kind of screwed. So they connected population control with getting loans for development. Um, so some people now here's where the hepatitis B thing breaks comes in. Um, the the Ford people got caught red-handed in the 1970s. I was telling you about the villages in India that were surrounded, and in the middle of the night, 3 in the morning, your village would be surrounded. There'd be cops everywhere on horses with whips, and they would go through the village and pull all the men out and have them forcibly sterilized, in the most unsanitary, most unhealthy ways imaginable. Many of them got infections. Some of them died. Same thing with the women. Anyway, this was done by Indira Gandhi. Um, and when she got out of power, the other side said, "Look what you did," and it got publicized. New York Times, the horrors were finally made obvious. So what the Ford Foundation did was kind of like go undercover and then farm out their nefarious activities to little nonprofits. So Ford Foundation was seen to be pure, and then they would funnel the money. And of course, they took their employees, and one of their employees was a guy named Mahoney. I can't remember. I think it's Richard Mahoney, and he went from being a hardcore population control guy to morphing into vaccines. And he became one. Here's where this all ties together with the hepatitis B vaccine. He was one of the guys who was fully responsible for the fact that every newborn in the United States and in many undeveloped nations, they don't do it in England. Wait, no, they might do it in England because that's an undeveloped nation. But Germany, they don't do it. They don't do it in France. They don't do it in Norway or Sweden. But they do it in Cambodia and Laos, Botswana, He's the reason that happened. And he was a Ford employee who branched out, and he with some other people created something called PATH, and something like we're going to distribute all this wonderful health technology to the rest of the world. Well, all they distributed was dangerous birth control methods and vaccines. And they did a few positive things, but primarily that the vaccine was their major thing. And they were rolling out vaccines without testing them on poor people, of course. Um, anyway, that's Richard Mahoney. I believe that's his name. There was another guy named Perkin, and I can't remember his first name. And he was very involved in creating, either I can't remember. I have to, tell you, man, there's a lot of material here, but he was very involved in reproductive technology, which for the Ford Foundation meant creating very dangerous drugs that really injured people, or very dangerous, you know, whatever you call them, mechanisms that really injured people. And so Perkin was part of the Ford Foundation. Okay. And then again, they pivoted from this super aggressive contraceptive thing, which they called family planning. It's just a cover for reducing the population of developing nations. Oh, and also populations within the United States. Native Americans were hit by this very hard. Poor African Americans were hit by this very hard. Um, if you're not in that category, you probably didn't experience this. But believe me, if you were in those communities or you were living in a rural area that, of peasants where people didn't have any money, um, they were feeding themselves and farming and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't have any money, they didn't have any sophistication, they didn't have any schools. You would be descended upon by the Ford Foundation with all their schemes. But and like as I said, they got caught in India, and they had to go cover and like a bad plant, scattering bad seed. They all these different nonprofits spun off, run by who? Ford people, which was originally funded by who? Rockefeller people. Okay, and who did they partner with? The World Health Organization, which was what? Founded by basically the Rockefeller people, right? Um, all right. So then Mahoney created this thing called the International Task Force on Hepatitis B Immunization. um, and there was a guy named Kane that was involved in that. And while he was working for the CDC, for some reason, the CDC placed him at the World Health Organization, paid his bills, and so on. And he was embedded in the World Health Organization. And he's the guy that pushed hard for universal hepatitis B vaccine. They started with the poorer countries, the countries that couldn't say no because they didn't know to say no. They look up, yeah, if you've ever traveled to the third world, people look at America like it's God because we have all this sophisticated technology. So if you're a poor in a poor country and you don't have much infrastructure, and in comes the Ford people or the immunization task force people offering you all kinds of money and all kinds of knowledge and all kinds of services, you're probably going to say yes. And that's what they did. All right. So PATH, which was a spin-off of the Ford Foundation population control scheme, got way behind hepatitis B. Why? Because the new model for population control became, let's immunize all these kids so more of them survive and the families are not so inspired to have more children. That's the logic. That's the logic behind global vaccination. And Bill Gates once slipped. Somewhere there's a video where he's talking about vaccines as a form of population control. And you can see he goes, oops, and he changed his direction of his talk. But that's how they envision it. That's how they envision it. And of course, it also is literally controlled because if you've embedded one of these vaccination infrastructures, right? You got the doctors are giving it and you've got the distribution and you've embedded it into the schedule. Suddenly and you can't make it yourself because you're a poor country. Suddenly you're dependent on who? On the manufacturer. And who the manufacturers? Typically rich countries. So anyway, let's go on. So this guy Perkin, who was involved in all these nefarious, dangerous, harming birth control methods, which they scattered willy-nilly without any intelligence or compassion or responsibility around the developing world, he was approached by guess who? This is where the passing of the torch comes. William Gates Sr., Bill Gates' father, because Bill Gates' father was a big family planning guy. But what he really was a population control guy. Okay, so he went to Perkin, and it was sort of an accident of history. I don't think it was planned, but unfortunately it worked very well. PATH, which spun off from the Ford Foundation, um, had their offices in Seattle. Now, I found out later why there was a foundation out there in Seattle that was rabidly population control, eugenics, make sure we don't have too many brown people out there. And so I guess it was a friendly place to have your facility. Also, it was 3,000 miles away from the Ford headquarters. And remember, they were trying to launder their reputation and get some of this dirty work off-sited. Follow? So the Gates family, this is long before young Billy started Microsoft. Well, actually, no, I'm wrong. I'm wrong about that, but it doesn't really matter. Um, So Gates Sr. was watching Bill start to rack up money. And he was, by the way, a foundation expert. That was his job as an attorney. Um, Bill Gates' father. So he's looking around for cover stories. What can we create a foundation around and claim to be doing good while we're sheltering our money. Uh, and Bill Gates Sr. approached Perkin, the guy from Ford, who was the mastermind of some really horrific population control measures. Okay, and Perkin said, "Hey, you know what? We got a new thing, Bill, Bill Sr. It's the vaccine. That's where we're going now. That's where it's all headed." So um, Gates, the father, bought the vaccine thing, and then sold it to young Bill. You follow? And this happened in 1998. And very quickly, um, they ramped up their foundation. And Gates, who wanted to, remember because he had such a terrible reputation, he still does among people that are intelligent. Among idiots, he's considered a world hero. But if you actually know what's going on, you know what a nefarious individual he was, both when he was in this software industry and now what he's doing now. I mean, he's bad news. He's profoundly bad news. So he needed reputation laundering. So at Davos, he pledged to give, nearly $1 billion, which was a lot of money in 2000. Now it's nothing. But that was a lot of money, and that made him seem like a hero. And what was he going to do? He was going to spread these wonderful vaccines to all the poor countries. And the guy, Kane, Kane, the guy that the CDC embedded in the world, because the CDC wanted these vaccines, because the hepatitis division of the CDC was run by zealots who believed that they ignored all the other causes of hepatitis. Contaminated water, contaminated food, toxic work environments, um, uh, mold on rice, and other staples, which happens a lot in the tropical world. That wrecks your liver over time. Alcohol abuse, because the people that most likely get cirrhosis and those that develop into cancer, and it's a very small percentage, but those that get that, a high percentage of them are alcohol abusers. So you add the fact that they are malnourished, that they're living in poor housing conditions, that they are working in a factory with solvents and fumes all day long and nobody gives a flying freak about their health. Then they go home and they get drunk, and they do this for decades. Your liver's going to die. Okay, but the vaccine people ignore all those contributing factors, and they attribute everything to a virus, right? And then this is where it gets truly insane. They have this millennial, I don't mean the generation, but I mean crazy. Not that millennials are crazy. Some are, but not all of them. But they had this millennial pie in the sky belief that they could eliminate the virus from the planet. Sound familiar? Remember when they wanted to eliminate the COVID virus from the planet? So they were going to shut down every business and every church and every school and everything, every library. All normal human life was going to be shut down while these maniacs set out on the impossible task of making the COVID virus completely disappear from the planet. Well, they want to do the same thing with the hepatitis B vaccine. That's why, and run to the future here, or give you the punchline. That's why they're injecting every baby at birth. Mother could be 100% healthy, tested and healthy. The baby's 100% tested and healthy. There's no way they're going to be exposed to drugs or any of the other things alcohol or any other things that lead to liver disease. It doesn't matter. These maniacs want the total eradication of the hepatitis B vaccine, of the hepatitis B virus. Now, conveniently, that original millennial crazy view has been forgotten. But the program continues and will continue forever until people start saying no. Do you see how this developed? So it was Kane, who was part of the Path Network, who was working for the CDC underneath a guy who was crazy obsessed about the virus and not thinking about any other cause contributing factor to hepatitis, who was embedded by the CDC in the World Health Organization, which the Rockefellers helped create, who then pushed to have all these poor countries accept universal birth doses of the hepatitis B vaccine. Okay, and then Gates Sr. got caught up with these very same people, or some of the same people, and decided, hey, forget the family planning, in quotes, because it's just a, it's very, very nice saying, but when you look under the hood at what they're actually doing to people, especially the poor, not so nice at all. They decided, hey, we're going to switch to vaccines. And then when young Billy went to Davos in 2000 to try to, remember, he had been put on trial by the Congress, and then he was in court too for the despicable antitrust activities that he carried out in the software industry at the very same time. So he's laundering his reputation with his dad's advice, which came where? From the hepatitis B people, who were who? They were forward population control people, who were who? They were kickstarted by the Population Council, which was what? John Rockefeller III. Okay, and what preceded that? Passing the torch from the Rockefeller overseas medical monstrosity to the World Health Organization. So there's a continuity, all right. And now this is where the whole thing gets tied up in a nice package. Not only did Gates start his foundation and start throwing vaccine money all over the place, which, by the way, he profits from massively. He basically uses his private power through the foundation to get all these different countries to go on board with various vaccines, and then he owns companies on the back end that make, manufacture, and distribute the vaccines. I mean, why this is allowed to continue and why this isn't a daily outrage among the whole world, I don't know. But that's the way it works. Then, to put the bow on it, tie it up with a bow, World Health Organization still cooking away, right? They're the ones that declare pandemics, right? And once they declare a pandemic, then every health director of every nation has to declare a pandemic, and all kinds of millions and billions of dollars start flowing to stamp out the pandemic, right? And that gets passed down locally, and next thing you know, your kid's school is closed, or your grandkid's school is closed, your church is closed, your stores are closed, your favorite restaurants are closed, long-standing family-owned businesses are put out of business. And on and on and on and on it goes. Don't forget what they did to us. Never forget, right? We're supposed to never forget. Don't forget what they did to us. And that flowed from the WHO. So I've been talking about tying up the bow. Who controls the World Health Organization? Well, the biggest donor by far is the United States, or was the United States. The second biggest donor, surpassing the EU, surpassing, Japan, is Bill Gates, private citizen. All right, so that's how the torch was passed. Started with the Rockefellers. They eradicated all independent, I don't want to call it alternative medicine. This was functional medicine. It worked. They eradicated it all in favor of their model. They destroyed all the competing business schools. Well, they are business schools, really, but they're called medical schools. And then they transferred the power over medicine from physicians to the various states. And then they went out into the rest of the world and did all kinds of diabolical experimentation on people in the developing world. They realized, hey, maybe we shouldn't be involved in this, because they got caught too. This isn't looking too good. Why don't we, here, let's create the WHO. And the WHO, World Health Organization, was founded by people from the Rockefeller International Health Division. And it was, and then the Rockefellers got really interested in population control. They kickstarted the Ford Foundation that created this massive juggernaut did horrific things around the world. They got caught in India, and then they spun off all these lower profile groups, but they're all Ford Foundation people that were initially pushing the population control, but then did the pivot to vaccines. And Gates Sr., who was a population eugenics control guy, he was looking around for ideas for young Billy, and he ended up with talking with one of these people, these population control people, who said, "Hey, we're going to vaccines now," right? And then immediately, pretty quickly, Gates went all in to help um, launder his reputation, shelter his money, and to create a new line of income for himself in the biomedical field. And then he finished up uh, by taking control of the World Health Organization. So Gates, and we know this, controls the World Health Organization, their proclamations about what's a pandemic and what's not. He controlled all the epidemiology schools, the main ones, University of Washington, and he also controlled the one in England. The two schools that declare that this COVID thing was going to be the greatest disaster ever seen by mankind were schools entirely controlled by Bill Gates financially. Okay, so he controlled the declaration on the scientific level. He controlled the declaration on the global level. He controlled the media. We covered that in great detail during COVID. Over $300 million given in very loose money to the BBC, to the Guardian, to Le Monde, which is the big paper in France, to El País, which is the big paper in Spain, to, of course, National Public Radio. I love that they've been defunded. They should never get a nickel. They're the biggest warmongers you've ever seen. I've never seen a war that National Public Radio wasn't 100% involved in helping promote. And of course, it's laundered by, hey, we do a few, cultural things. They're a propaganda outlet. And actually, the guy that ran National Public Radio for a while was the head of Voice of America. And he literally, on his vacation, because he lives around here, he grew up around here, literally, in the run-up to the Iraq War, when nobody was on board with it, he was doing a tour of the country, and he came here to his hometown as head of NPR and talked about why we needed to go into Iraq. That's NPR, guys. They don't deserve one freaking penny. And if you've been giving them money, we could use some, because we work hard, and we actually give you information that's useful. But anyway, so that's how it went from the Rockefellers to the creation of the World Health Organization, to the obsession with population control, which that torch was passed to the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation blew themselves reputationally, so it then got scattered around. One of the main groups was PATH. Thanks to McNamara, there became this impetus for, you don't get money as a country from the World Bank unless you control your population. And then vaccines got added to the population control mix. Okay? And then they realized, it's a lot easier to vaccinate people than to do all this other stuff. And it's a lot more profitable because you got to vaccinate them for everything all the time, right? And then because PATH, this group, happened to be based in Seattle, and Gates Sr. was looking to help his son launder his reputation and create a foundation. They went to the population control people, said, oh, no, we got a better thing as vaccines. Immediately, you had Gavi, which was run by Kane. So the guy that the CDC placed with the World Health Organization that made all these countries adopt the birth dose of the hepatitis B vaccine ended up helping run Gates's vaccine initiative, which, the guy's got a lot of money. He's had a lot of power. And then Gates tied it all up by basically functionally taking control of the World Health Organization and the news media. And we saw all this during COVID, but we didn't know where it came from. At the very beginning of COVID, I said, I don't know what's going on, but we're like Vietnamese peasants in the rice paddies being bombed by B-52 bombers. We don't know why they're bombing us. We don't know where these planes are coming from. We don't know who manufactured them. We don't know who made the bombs. We don't know what's going on. All we know is we're being bombarded. And I think I did as good a job as anybody in helping understand that dynamic. But now, through writing this hepatitis B book, I'm getting deeper into the mechanism. So basically, Rockefellers to the World Health Organization to the World Bank telling countries you better control your population, to the Ford Foundation branching out with millions and millions of dollars, distributing all this crazy, reckless, hazardous birth control methodology, including forced sterilization at the barrel of a gun. That then got spread into these little nonprofits. They pivoted to vaccines, and they happened to link up with the Gates family in Seattle, kind of an accident. And now this maniac with tons of money, Bill Gates, is still wielding insane amounts of power, unchecked. And what it boils down to is our health policy is not being determined by doctors, practicing physicians, you know? It's being determined by private people who are unaccountable. And this has been going on since the Rockefellers took over medicine at the early part of the last century. So this has been brass check, and this is what I'm up to. And, I said long ago, even before COVID, that we are living under a military, well, it is a military dictatorship, but it's a medical dictatorship. And by the way, the military has a lot to do, and this is going to be in the book on Hep B, has a lot to do with the medical dictatorship. They are like this. And there's a woman named, and unfortunately, I don't know her last name. I don't know how to pronounce it. But her first name's Sasha. Many of you know her. And she's been talking about this a lot. But I go into it from a different angle, and I can confirm her well-founded and well-researched suspicions that there is a military element to this medical dictatorship. And again, we saw it full force during COVID, but it's always been here since the Rockefellers took over medicine. And it will always be here until we start saying no. So my purpose of the hepatitis B book, and by the way, you can download it for free. I hope you will. I hope you'll tell people about it. I have a short version. I'm working on the long version because it's like War and Peace, man. It's unbelievable. All the twists and turns. But I have a short thing. It's available right now because the answer to this is A, to be informed, and also to realize you can say no. Okay? And this is going to be my theme for the last part of my life. We got to find all the places we can say no and say no. And this is a big one. And if people understand the absolutely reckless, no science, guys, the science is shit. Okay? Don't think they've got some great science and they've proven nothing. Okay? And yet, and this is the bottom line, baby comes into the world, first day they're on this planet, well, they're on the planet, for the first day they're in the terrestrial environment, their very first day, someone jams a needle into them and injects them with something they don't need. And it has the capacity to cause harm. The manufacturers admit it. It's on the warning labels. So I believe if the country knew this, we would have more people being informed and making an informed decision about whether to accept this or not. And this is the domino. If we can get a critical mass of people to say no to this, or let me just say this, to be informed, make up your own mind, do whatever you want, but at least be informed. If we can get a lot of informed people armed to make an intelligent decision, that's the first domino in taking this whole thing down. So that's why I'm working on it so hard. I think my seat has been sinking as I've been talking. I don't know. Anyway, that's our medical. That's why our medical system is so completely screwed. Yeah, pharma's involved, and pharma's ripping us off, and it's run by demons, and there's no question about that. But there's this larger structure that makes all this possible. And believe it or not, pharma, this is going to sound crazy, they're kind of a bit player in this. They're on the stage, they're profiting, God knows. They're doing harm, God knows. But it's this larger structure, this population control writ large mentality. That is the problem. And the fact that the whole thing is run by, you know, foundation heads and Bill Gates and individuals who are not accountable to anybody. And again, I want to end with this. There's no science behind any of this stuff. The science is utter crap. I mean, you'll see when the book comes out. And nobody can deny it. Once it's laid out step by here. So where did you even come up with the idea for this vaccine? Well, we concluded this. Well, you look at that and it's full of holes. Okay, well, how did you get there? Well, we originally had this. That was a foundation, and that foundation's rotten too. Well, where did that come from? Well, it came from this great foundation, and that foundation. I mean cognitive foundation, theoretical, intellectual foundation. And as you trace back all these different scientific milestones, you realize they're so flimsy. None of it, if they were being presented today, straight, cold, they wouldn't be accepted. And yet the whole edifice is built upon them, and nobody ever goes back and says, what is this based on? Well, the hepatitis B vaccine is based on bullshit, fraud, the most flimsy kind of science, propaganda, coercive mentality, the idea that people need to be coerced or should be coerced. Anyway, I'm going on and on about this, but you get it. I hope you learned something here. I didn't know any of this. I never heard anybody lay this out so clearly, but this is the structure that we're dealing with. So I'm going to bid you fond adieu and get back to work. It can be 100 degrees here with 70% humidity. I didn't move to Florida. I'm in New York State. It's supposed to be a little cooler here in the summer, but apparently not.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.